No, last year the UN Secretary. Your Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, as you know, last year summit to unleash the power of food to drive progress across all 17 years. I thank you for stepping forward to become a leader for the food system's change. These dialogues bring together people from all parts of society to share evidence, experience, and new ideas. Food is powerful. The food we eat brings us together as families, as communities, and as nations. It underpins our culture, our economies, and our relationship with the natural world. The world's food system touches every aspect of human existence, which makes them valuable instruments of change. The reason we are having a summit this year, and the reason we are not set to achieve on our shared vision and goals for the 2030 agenda. Our food systems have staggering levels of inequality. Our key priority for this summit is to bring more inclusive, equitable, and healthier food systems while also safeguarding our planet. These dialogues are a core element of the summit process. They are an opportunity to come together and identify priorities and actions to be taken for a better future. This will be a people's summit, but it will also be a solution summit because everyone is part of the food system. We are looking to get all of you and your ideas around the table to ensure that action is owned and driven by different actors. We want action to be driven by you. Your leadership and the ability to have courageous conversations rather than we can't have courageous conversations about what needs to change and how we need to work together. Then you to determine the food system you want for your future and to act on it to make them a reality. We must do this understanding fully well our place in the world and that what we do. I look forward to working with you in this summit process. Together, we can build a world of inclusive growth, environmental sustainability, and social justice. No one is poor and no one is left behind. I thank you.
Prof. Akenji, it's now over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
We hear you loud and clear, Chair.
Hello.
Professor, we hear you.
You can go ahead. We are clearly hearing you.
Hello.
Yes, we are hearing you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Good morning, depending on where you are. Professor Dipala, can we begin?
Yes, Chair, please. Yes, we can begin.
It's raining here, cats and dogs. So that's why I keep saying hello. We have a lot of rain here, just started. So,
Okay, please. You can start.
I can hear you.
Okay. You can hear us?
Yes, I will go ahead. I can't hear you well, but I think I can go ahead and begin.
Yes, please.
Most distinguished speakers and panelists, the Road Forum Executive Secretary, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you from Cameroon, a very rainy afternoon for us here, and I welcome you to this first webinar, actually launching the Zimbabwe Forum AGM beginning on December 12, 2022. My name is Teresa Nkwa Kenji. I'm the Vice Chancellor of the University of Bamenda and Board Chairperson of Forum, and I am extremely elated and honored to serve as the moderator for this, our webinar on the theme Moving Forward, the United Nations Food System Summit 21 Action Plan, Need for Collaborative Undertakings. Our discussions will be led by very high-profile speakers and panelists. And for the sake of time, permit me introduce each at the time of their respective presentations. The important objectives of this dialogue are, firstly, to review the commitments made by multi-stakeholders and take stock of the actions that have been taken towards the implementation of the recommendations made by the UN Food Summit. And secondly, to explore options for partnerships and/or pathways for university, STI, and community engagement to jumpstart improvements in agri-food systems as articulated by the summit. We will, at the end of our discussions, have a wrap-up session which will focus on the following. One, what are the key emerging issues and needed actions to strengthen agri-food systems, especially in Africa? And two, what are the next steps in developing actionable pathways and the opportunities for partnership? At this point, I will move into the housekeeping guidelines. So I want to inform all our participants that there is simultaneous English, French, Arabic, and Portuguese translation. You'll find on the horizontal bar below your screens a globe, which is the icon for interpretation. Click on this icon and select the language of your choice. And you can choose mute original audio if you want to hear only the interpretation version. I invite the participants to use the question and answer box to ask questions, and I will do my best to read out to the speakers and panelists your questions so that they are properly addressed. I equally invite panelists to speak slow enough to enable effective interpretation. David will be giving us technical assistance during this webinar in case we have any technical issues arising. At this juncture, I call on Professor Adipala Ekwamo, the Executive Secretary of the Forum, to give the opening remarks. Professor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Yes, it is indeed my great honor and pleasure to add to your welcome to all the participants, and in particular, to welcome and recognize the presence of Her Excellency Ambassador Josepha Sako, the African Union Commissioner for Rural Development, Sustainable Agriculture, and the Blue Economy. In a special way, I recognize the presence of Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the President, Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, and the United Nations Food System Summit Special Envoy. I recognize and welcome the presence of Dr. Leonard Missy, the Head of Unit in Directorate General for International Partnership, European Commission. I recognize and welcome with special appreciation the presence of Professor Abebe Gabriel, the Food and Agricultural Organization Assistant Director General and the Regional Representative for Africa. I welcome and recognize the presence of Honorable Lobin Chaki Lowe, the Minister of Agriculture, Malawi. I welcome and recognize the presence of Honorable Janine Cooper, the Minister of Agriculture, Liberia. I recognize and welcome my colleague, friend, Yemi Akibamijo, the Executive Director, Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa. I welcome and recognize the presence of Dr. Stephen Muchiri, the Chief Executive Officer, East African Farmers Federation. I do hope he has made it. I recognize the presence, so we expect the participation of Dr. Usman Badiane, Executive Chairperson and Acting Managing Director, Academia 2063. I also recognize the presence of the colleague, friend, and research champion, Professor Linus Umesurike Opara from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. I acknowledge the presence of all the vice chancellors, forum board members, and others present, the presence of university stakeholders and other actors, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to this dialogue, which signals the commencement of the 18th Forum Annual General Meeting activities. What better way would there be for a network of 157 universities from 40 African countries that are looking towards catalyzing sustainable, inclusive agricultural development to feed and create prosperity for Africa, than to reflect on the action points from the United Nations Food System Summit and the implication for agri-food system on the African continent. I applaud the United Nations Secretary General for acknowledging that transforming agri-food systems is central to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals and indeed the Global Agenda 2030. For Africa, it is very, very critical for the attainment of our vision, Agenda 2063. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor for a forum to host you to this meeting that is considering the way forward and the action points since the convening of the Food System Summit. The summit promised bold new actions and solutions. The resolution made look towards the involvement of all stakeholders to make our planet a better place for the current and future generation. It was recognized as a collective effort with implications at individual, institutional, regional, and global levels. Universities and other research actors were not left behind in these discussions. Indeed, the forum convened independent dialogues that explored the university policy option for strengthening agri-food systems, for improved productivity, inclusivity, and resilience. Universities in the Forum Network articulated science solutions and collaborative pathways for the development of agri-food systems in Africa, and we contributed to the common African position championed by the African Union Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, I believe that all the actions that we take should be collaborative and deliberate. The role of universities and other actors in improving agri-food system is no exception. It is even more pertinent in Africa, where agricultural value chains and the agri-food systems are the foundations of the livelihoods and economic development of the continent. We have to task the universities and research institutions and other actors to contribute to inclusive and sustainable solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are taking stock and reviewing the commitments made by multi-stakeholders during the Food Systems Summit. It is my prayer that this dialogue, 1 year since the summit, will take us to the next step towards collaborative engagement and action. I do appreciate that in this dialogue, although virtual, we have the movers and the shakers of this complex agri-food system. The UN Special Envoy for the summit, the African Union, the FAO representatives, honorable ministers, our partners, vice chancellors, I thank you for honoring our invitation. The ball indeed is in our court as individuals, as institutions, to ensure that we move forward beyond dialogue. Let us propose after this dialogue to have tangible actions that will drive us towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals through improved agri-food system. I once again take this opportunity to welcome you to the Forum Annual General Meeting that is beginning with this pre-AGM webinar focusing on moving forward the UN Food System 2021 Action Plan. We have a suite of dialogue activities, dialogue and engagements. The grand final will be 12th to 16th December 2022 in Harare, Zimbabwe, where we shall be hosted by the government of Zimbabwe and the forum member universities in Zimbabwe. It will be a blended event, and you are most welcome to Harare and to any other place, and to join us physically or virtually. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for listening to me. Back to you, Chair. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Prof. I can't see it. Thank you very much. I'm still grappling with sound issues here. Thank you very much, Prof. Atipala. And we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda on the program. That is session 1. For the next 1 hour, we are going to listen to 3 speakers. And the objective of this session is to enable participants appreciate the United Nations Food System Summit context, its significance to Africa, and the implications for higher agricultural education. This will be followed by 20 minutes discussion. I am honored at this point to invite our first speaker, Professor Ebebe, to give us, I hope you can hear me. We're having a lot of sound issues here.
Here, we hear you. We hear you well.
So I'm going to invite our first speaker for the official opening, and this is going to be by the AU Commissioner for Rural Development, Sustainable Agriculture, and the Blue Economy, Her Excellency Ambassador Josepha Sako. And she's going to talk to us on integrating continental frameworks to strengthen agri-food systems in Africa. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Yeah, she has not yet logged in. Maybe we can move to the next speaker. She has not yet logged in.
Chair, perhaps Dr. Agnes Kalibata could speak. Chair, may I propose that Dr. Agnes Kalibata talks?
Okay, so we're going to listen to Professor Dr. Agnes Kalibata to present the keynote address. Dr. Kalibata is the President, Alliance for Green Evolution in Africa. And she's going to be talking about the key outcomes, decisions, and actions from the United Nations Food System Summit 2021, implication for Africa. Dr. Kalibata, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for those introductory remarks. And again, I apologize that you're having difficulties, but we are really happy to be here with you today. Thank you, Professor Dupara, for organizing this meeting and for inviting us. And I really want to appreciate the place and role you've played as a leader, but also the work that Reform has done as we headed into the Food System Summit, but also the work that you continue to do today to bring knowledge, to share knowledge, to bring information to the communities we are working with, but also to provide leadership and direction in some of these issues that continue to be areas we are grappling with. I want to appreciate and thank the Commission of the African Union, Commissioner Sako, for honoring us today. I know she'll be joining, but also for the work she has done to advance what we are doing in the continent in the agricultural sector and now in the food systems. She worked extremely hard to mobilize the continent, and she worked with NEPAD, and also wanted to appreciate the role and place of AUDA NEPAD in really ensuring that we were mobilized. I'll be honest with you, colleagues and Professor Dupara, I joined the Food System Summit not because I was lacking of work or because I was not busy enough. I just wanted to make sure that we engage, that we as a continent do not get left behind on something so important. I can't tell you how many meetings we go to, and you get the feeling that we were not at the table when these meetings were happening. This is one meeting that we really needed to be at the table. This is one meeting we really needed to be part of the process of decision making, but also embrace and understand what is at stake, because it's a place where we are most affected. So I really want to appreciate the support I've gotten from you all, starting with the Commissioner and NEPAD, but also you, Professor Dupara and Reform and colleagues, really standing behind us and making sure that the summit becomes a success. We would not have been able to do this work without the support of, Leonard Mitzi and his colleagues as the development community that saw the need, but also wanted to make sure that this summit becomes successful. So I'm happy that you invited him here today to be part of this conversation. And I just wanted to appreciate that. I did this work with the RBS and in partnership with the RBS. FAO was a critical leader in this area, and I'll be talking to you all how FAO has taken on the mantra from what we did and are taking this work forward. So that said, and recognizing in the interest of time, I want to go very quickly go to some of what I consider some of the successes and achievements of the summit that we need to build on as we go forward. When we came to the Food System Summit, it was really about answering the call the Secretary General made around two things. That we find solutions that can get us closer to solving the 2030 challenge that we have. We have signed up an agenda. All of us, our countries are signed up, but we are behind on nearly every issue we signed up to. So that was his challenge number one. Number two, he recognized that we as individuals have something to bring to the table. So that if we made this a summit, a people's summit, we had the biggest opportunity for success. And indeed, we went out there and we really made it a people's summit. And that's how you and your colleagues, Professor Dipara, owned it and made it your own and took it to Malawi and brought in the president of Malawi and the whole country behind you, but also really carried out a number of dialogues, that both national dialogues and independent dialogues that did bring in other people. That's what making it a people's summit was about, just trying and making sure that in all places and all corners of the world, we give people a voice and an opportunity to be part of this conversation. And again, here I really want to commend the EU for insisting that these national dialogues and these independent dialogues happen, because we would have been challenged without the resources to support the dialogues to happen in some of these places. So moving forward then, in terms of solutions, how did we deal with the solutions challenge? We did identify a number of areas that were critical to the Food System Summit, and you now know the 5 action tracks that are now renamed the 5 action areas as in the Secretary General's statement. And in those 5 action tracks, we really made sure that we provided space and opportunity for the dialogue and engagement, again, that would bring out the best the world has to offer. There are innovations in different institutions, there are innovations in private sector, there are innovations in farmers and producers and many communities. So providing an opportunity for these innovations to be part of how we provide solutions to the world was really something that did provide strong answers to and provide the support that we needed for the solutions part of the summit the Secretary General called for. So really a few things that I consider success with regards to this summit. We were able to reach over 3.5 billion people. I didn't reach the 5 billion I went looking for, but we were able to reach 3.5 billion people based on the numbers we were given. And those 3.5 billion people really came to the summit or engaged the summit in ways that allows them to understand what is at stake, and ways that allows them to understand that individually we have something to offer to change our food system and to really be on top of taking responsibility for what's happening in our world. So just being able to build that consensus, that shift of mind, that thinking in our food system that recognizes that we actually are responsible for the world that we are leaving behind as a people. The next part that was important for Africans and Pan-African was the fact that we were able to bring together a continental vision in what we call the common position, the common African position. It was presented by the chair of NEPAD at the Food Systems Pre-Summit, and it was further presented by the chair of the union at the summit itself in New York. So, and this brings out a number of issues that are pertinent to the continent and that the continent would look to advance. One of the other areas that I consider to have been a huge success, of course, is the fact that we were able to bring out 52 solution clusters across the 5 areas that I mentioned. And these solution clusters are out there. They've now translated into what we are calling multi-stakeholder coalitions that are looking to work with different people, different countries. And these coalitions are already beginning to provide answers in some challenges that we all are already living with. But again, probably the biggest buy-in we could have hoped for, and again, the biggest success is the fact that 166 countries stepped forward. These countries participated in the summit, and these countries have put forward pathways for food systems change. We now have over 112 pathways that have been submitted. 49 of those pathways come from Africa. And again, 39 African countries participated, and 37 of those have already presented pathways for food systems transformation. Again, huge opportunity and really potential for huge success. 77 of those countries that participated at head of state and head of government level. So again, huge. In terms of follow-up, the Secretary General has put in place a hub that is based at FAO that is going to be supporting him to report and supporting the whole ecosystem to report back. So the hub challenge that has been with the whole Russia-Ukraine crisis that they were trying to take off and all these challenges we have, it just reminds me of what happened with COVID-19 when I was taking on the Food System Summit. But they are managing and they are stepping forward. They will actually be here next week to work with African countries on some of their pathways and how they move forward. Next year, there will be the first report back. So we need to think through what are we taking to this report back, Secretary General report back next year. And then how are we positioning that report back against the whole idea of 8 harvests to go to solve the hunger challenge against increasing numbers of hunger, as we already know. So, but I want to say that despite the Russia-Ukraine crisis, we must stay the course. We must keep the momentum going because we don't have any other alternative. We need to rethink, redesign, and really reconfigure our food system so that they are not part of the problem, which we know they are today. They are part of the problem. We need to deal with the challenge of nutrition. We have increasing levels of malnutrition. We have increasing levels of people that are left out of affordable diets. We can't afford that. That's where we are at. And the opportunity in the food system is that we can actually start addressing some of these challenges. So to do that, we must operationalize these food system pathways that governments have put forward. If all the 112 countries came forward and operationalized these food system pathways that they are talking about, that would be a huge opportunity. We must also agree that we are going to have to hold each other accountable. We learned in the Food System Summit that things that happen in one part of the world impact us all. COVID-19 impacted the soul. It started in one place, it's with us all. The Russia-Ukraine crisis is with us all today, right? Never mind where it's happened, but most important, climate change is affecting African farmers in ways that they could never imagine. They don't even understand what's going on. So we must hold each other accountable as we try to build food systems. There's no way one part of the world is going to build food systems and another is not. There's no way one part of the world is trying to move and another is not. We might say we are not responsible for the changes in climate, but we are where we are today and we must contribute to correcting that and we must do our parts. And there are really opportunities that we can talk about as we go into this conversation around what we can do to help correct where things are at today. But also we must find financing to support these countries as they step forward. We must ensure that they get the support they need to be able to move forward in a food system perspective. We need to move food systems at the center of COP27 conversations, COP28 conversations. We can't say one thing and do another. We go to these COPs, we talk about agriculture. We come to some of these conversations, we talk about food systems, because food system does recognize that we're impacting our environment. So really huge opportunities there. But let me conclude on this. I want to conclude on what I consider to be some of a very few guiding principles that we must consider as we move our food systems forward. And these are applicable to Africa as they would be applicable to any part of the world. We must, of course, strengthen national capacities, and that's where these universities like the ones in your forum come in. We must ensure that what we are doing is based on evidence and policy, and we look forward to seeing your role in ensuring that this part becomes stronger. The Food Systems Summit would not have been what it was if the scientific community, which was largely made of universities and research institutions, had not stepped forward and provided the guidance we needed, but also provided credibility that the summit needed. So we need you at the table to ensure that how we move forward from a policymaker's perspective is anchored in science and evidence. We must recognize the role of dialogue. The summit did show that we can actually engage and talk together. Even though there are groups that did stay behind in some cases, but they also, in their heart of hearts, as they would say in English, they know we did try very hard to reach out to them. They know we are all trying to move forward together. So creating those spaces to be able to dialogue and talk is extremely important, because the food system needs all of us to be able to engage farmers, indigenous people, producers. They bring so much knowledge, and we are not talking to them enough to tap into what they know. And then a good understanding of the local context. Please, there's no global food system. Food systems are local. They all have their local challenges, but also their local opportunities. How do we anchor solutions in this understanding of the opportunities that food systems bring at local level, and ensure that we are building on that, and we are building on that knowledge, and we are taking it forward. And lastly, we must address some of the difficult conversations, right? This moving the food system forward will have trade-offs. And there are some trade-offs, there are interests, there are all sorts of things. One of the things we learned in the Food System Summit is that dialogue, but also addressing difficult conversations is an important part of how we move forward together. So I'm happy to see that a number of countries on the African continent have already started working on translating pathways into food system strategies. I'm happy to see that AUD, NEPAD, and African Union are shaping how we come together around a shared framework of how we report back to the summit as a continent. So it's not the first time we would have done it. When we are designing a CADAP and working with CADAP, many of you, including Usman and Tim and others, and the baby at AU, really ensured that there was a framework that helped us understand how to engage, but also later came in to be extremely important in how you compare things, like for like. We need a similar framework in the Food Systems Summit that allows us to compare the progress we are making versus countries, and allows us to understand where countries are falling short so that we can support them. So that framework is very important, and we'll be discussing that at the AGRF. And at the AGRF, we also have an opportunity to see some of the ideas that are coming forward as countries step forward to present their food system pathways. The AGRF will be 1 year, which is next week, will be 1 year since the Food System Summit was launched. And as a continent, we are not waiting. We are making sure that some countries are moving forward. And I know that the Minister of Malawi is here. I had to call out his name. And I want to appreciate that Malawi is one of the countries that have really been working very hard to advance their food system pathways into strategies that are looking at nutrition and what is lacking in nutrition, that are looking at environmental issues, and they're looking at food security issues. So really already beginning to bring that food system perspective together. I've taken forever in this conversation. I want to appreciate you inviting me here. And I really want to underscore that without universities, without research, much as these are some of the areas that are most underinvested, without the work that you're doing, it's very difficult to say that we are anchoring our progress and our development in science, in really things that can be transformative and sustainable. So yes, we need you to be engaged, and we need you to continue providing guidance and direction. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalibata. You We're actually supposed to speak for 30 minutes, and you have done very well on time. You've given us a summary of what the UN Food System Summit was all about. You've stressed that as individuals, we have something to bring to the table. This summit provided the space for dialogue to bring out the best that the world can offer. You've given us a summary of some of the successes. You were able to reach 3.5 million people who engaged in the summit to share knowledge on how to change our food systems, bring together the common African position, and we're glad that of the 166 countries that participated, 49 were African countries, and so far, as you've stated, there have been 112 pathways submitted so far. We must keep the momentum going. We have to refigure, redesign, because we can overcome the challenges that we are facing, and we must operationalize the food system. So thank you so much for your rich presentation. And we are going to, I don't know if
it was 3.5 billion people, 3.5 billion people.
3.5 billion people, yes, I have that, who engaged in the summit, 3.5 billion, thank you so much. And I don't know if Ambassador Josepha Sako is in the house.
Not yet, not yet.
Not yet, okay, thank you. So we're going to move to Mr. Leonard Missy, who is the head of unit in Directorate General for International Partnerships, the European Commission. And we're going to hear from him his perspective from a development partner. Mr. Missy, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Nkoyu Akenji, and thanks to the forum, Professor Adipala, all the team, and thanks a lot also to what Dr. Kalibata said. We not only value a lot what has been done up to last year, but all the work that is being followed up also by the FAO Hub by Stefanos Fotiou. And I would like to maybe focus a bit on the operationalization dimension. We are in the European Union in a very critical moment, because next week I have to go in front of our EU 27 member states to defend and to basically roll out the 600 million additional funds that the European Union has earmarked to actually mitigate the crisis, the food crisis that has emanated from the aggression of the Russian Federation on Ukraine. We know that the international food markets have calmed down in recent weeks and months, but we also know that COVID, the war, the instability of supply chains, the impact on fertilizers, on inputs, on food price inflation is not going to just disappear and dissipate in the coming weeks and months. So the portfolio that we will be earmarking with our humanitarian colleagues, just to recall that earlier on this year, the leaders of the EU have identified what are known as European Development Funds decommitments. Basically, we will use 600 million, 100 million to contribute to the IMF fund in terms of focusing on the least developed countries on balance of payments. We know that there is a big problem of around 80 countries which have balance of payment shocks which are similar in nature, but probably more profound in some countries, linked to the food price inflation, but also the food fuel dimension. This is part of the work that the UN Crisis Response Group is doing. 150 million, which is of a humanitarian nature, which will be handled by our colleagues in DG ECHO. So this is humanitarian mainly through the World Food Programme, and the 350 million, which falls under our remit, which will focus on giving a production boost in a number of African countries, which will accompany the portfolio we have already decided upon a few years ago. As you know, the European Union has a portfolio which is multi-annual, and for the period 21-24, we had already earmarked well over 3 billion. In total, between humanitarian, international partnerships, our colleagues in DG NEAR, which handle the neighborhood, North Africa and Eastern neighborhood, including Ukraine and Eastern Europe, the total portfolio for the period, including the 600 million, is to the tune of 7.7 billion euros. I will not enter just into the funds, because the funds, as you would appreciate, are relatively limited. 7.7 billion is big money, but it's limited in terms of the challenges ahead. And an opportunity like today with researchers, I was myself a Commonwealth scholar, so I am very close to the research community and to many of you, because when I was in Reading University quite a long time ago, when I did my doctorate, I had a lot of colleagues from African countries and beyond. So I am close to what the research community potential can actually do in terms of the application of policy. However, as Dr. Kalibate said, there are a lot of challenges and various models and various typologies. And I just want to elaborate a bit on what the European Union wants to do in terms of the production typology. What type of production system do we want to focus on? Because there are a number of production typologies which the international donor community is willing, wants to support. Just to recall that part of the UN Food System Summit follow-up, the European Union has focused and will focus on 8 coalitions. We can't focus on the 26 or 30 coalitions. We wanted to focus on 8. And I will explain what we also expect from the research community, because this is not something that I can do in my small office with my small team. I have a team of 30, okay, 30 might be a big number, but 30 colleagues to manage a big portfolio and engage in all fora, it's not going to make the game changer. I want the game changer to be with you, with the research community, with civil society. Yesterday, I had a meeting with Via Campesina, which, for example, is somewhat critical of what we can do in terms of country-level interventions. I also meet farmers' organizations, women-led organizations, youth, where expectations are extremely high. They want us really to go into detail. And I will explain a bit what the detail is. One of the areas of the coalitions which we want to focus on is agroecology. So I really would like, with RU Forum and your networks, with FAO, with IFAD, with WFP and beyond, to see and to enter into detail how agroecology and models of agroecology can actually not only depart from a high, I would say, a higher cost input, which clearly has created shocks by high gas prices, high energy prices, but also is agroecology a way forward in terms of productivity gains and inclusive gains, inclusive from a more holistic approach from the farm to fork. So that is something that I'm interested in, linking to soil emissions, to carbon sequestration, to climate finance. We have a number of blending and guarantee programs that are clearly going to be focused on climate finance. So this also is the positioning that the European Union will give in the run-up to Sharm el-Sheikh and the COP, entering into detail on how we can actually stimulate more the soils to our soil missions and actually applying fertilizers to the appropriate soils. It's not just giving synthetic fertilizers wherever we want. We know that fertilizers, ideally organic fertilizers, must be dovetailed more to the typology of soils, to the soil health of that particular farm or region. So this is something that I really want to hear more from your networks, to collaborate more with you. You know that the European Union has been also very strong in supporting a lot of your platforms, Pan-African platforms of agricultural research, and that we work closely with European universities, linking also African universities from CIRAD, from Wageningen. So actually also share experiences of what's working and what's not. Another area is on plant proteins, cowpeas, beans, also how to help diversify the production system, but also diversify diets, because as we know, there is a strong narrative around maternal and child health. A colleague of us has just returned from Chad, where we also see the potential of food fortification, but integrating also local agricultural value chains. This is important also to support local communities, women-led cooperatives. It is not maybe what we call the silver bullet across the African continent, but if we start building nice stories which can be transformational at a local community level, these could also have impact at country level and maybe at regional level. An area where we are also supporting a lot with FAO under the Fish for ACP program, and it's another priority under another coalition, is blue foods. Quite often, aquatic resources are not really mentioned. It's important to prioritize blue foods, and blue foods not only in terms of wild fisheries, but also aquaculture, and also the potential of seaweed, alga, and other benefits that come from the aquatic resources to unleash the full potential of carbon sequestration from the oceans. Then the other areas that we want to focus on, and where we want also agriculture research and your networks to contribute in terms of ideas, would be on food loss and waste, on sustainable productivity, on healthy diets, on zero hunger, and on the school meals coalition. So these are a bit the areas. And what we will do is that in close collaboration with our delegations, and I will also make it a point that through our delegations and through the universities, we'll see how we can really start showcasing what is scalable and how to also link agriculture research from individual universities to the level of the CGIAR, because as you know as well, we are strong supporters of the CGIAR with a number of our member states, besides the Gates Foundation and the US administration, but also a CGIAR, which also looks into areas like I mentioned, agroecology being one of them. I think the lesson that we have learned from the UN Food System Summit of 2021 to the challenges that we are on the eve of another UN General Assembly is that we can't take anything for granted. The food system has been and will continue to be under tremendous stress, under tremendous pressure. Europe has experienced in the past weeks, months, one of the most severe droughts. The issue of droughts, the issue of water stress is a big challenge. So water linked to food, linked to energy is clearly going to be a top priority. So you can't speak about agriculture and food without factoring water and the cost of water and the availability of water. So I think there are a lot of areas where the universities, with the private sector, one of the tasks that I have been also assigned to focus on is to link more the applicability of research to private sector operators. How can we basically make the ideas stemming from the universities more privately applicable, but also fundable through the finance mechanisms that we have in terms of the risking at farm level and at cooperative level, because we also see a big challenge, a big issue around the risking small ticket sizes that small operators, small farming communities, and women-led organizations still confront. So that is why part of the portfolio that we will have will be actually with IFA to scale up and de-risk small-scale private investment, which could also be linked to the agriculture research that we are speaking about, from plant proteins to agroecology to systems around agroforestry, blue foods, livestock. Livestock is also an area, and that is why we are also looking at the possibility to focus more, for example, on the eradication of the pest deputy ruminant. So things which will have impact for communities at local level, but where the research community also can contribute, and also to the support that we give, for example, to the Global Forum of Agriculture Research, GFAR, where we can also help RU Forum link to FAO and the Rome-based agency on agricultural applications at the highest level. This is something that we can really start focusing on. So without further ado, Mrs. Chairwoman, I would also like maybe to give sufficient time for colleagues to ask questions, because this is also something which for us is important. We also need to respond to the issues, questions, concerns that the participants in this meeting have, so that we make the gap between policy making in Brussels or in Washington or Geneva with all your countries less big and more accessible in terms of what key solutions can be found at local level which have impact on our societies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Missy. You focused on operationalization dimensions. You have alerted us that the European Union is indeed looking for funds, financial support, and yes, the humanitarian assistance is being earmarked, but you've warned that there are limited funds when we consider the challenges that are ahead of us. You have called on more collaboration with World Forum in the area of agricultural research, stating that the research community has a lot to contribute for us to circumvent these challenges. As you rightly say, the United Nations Food Systems Summit has taught us that we cannot take anything for granted, focusing on challenges like the droughts, the Russian-Ukrainian war, climate changes. And you ended up by saying that the university and private sector must link with the university providing its findings on agricultural research to the private sector operators. So thank you very much. And it's time for us to go into our 20-minute discussion. I'm looking at the question and answer box here. We have Nikki Okeyo, who is a PhD student in nutrition, interested in insect food for humans And he's asking, what is the existing support opportunity for students like himself in experimenting household production and insect food? The next comes from Bernard Ekongo, who is thanking Dr. Agnes Kalibata for the clear presentation and asking if it is possible to share all the 100 pathways for strengthening food systems. And then we have, again from Bernard, was there a timeline made for operationalization of pathways by different countries? If yes, who is responsible for following up this? And I think that's what I find. Let's scroll down. Yes, and Nikki Okoye, again, between different African countries, food prices vary markedly, and government tax on transport and some foodstuff pushes the prices even higher. What can be done in cross-border trade to ensure a Somalian man does not die while a Kenyan man disposes tons of food waste? So those are the 4 questions that I see on the question answer box. I think maybe the first to Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who can you address the question on the 100 pathways for strength? Is it possible for you to share all the 100 pathways for strengthening food systems?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for these questions that are being presented here. The question on food system pathways, these are now documents that sit with the hub, the institution that is following up on food systems transformation. So I'm sure reaching out to Stephanos at the hub to get access to these pathways would be appropriate. But I think they're also publicly available as documents on the web. If you check the hub's website, you might find that these pathways are publicly available. So that would be my first port of call. And then if you don't get them, you reach out to Stephanos at FAO, who's the leader of the hub. And the question around your other question on engaging on insects, insect foods, there's a whole area that is emerging around insect foods. And one of the leading institutions in developing this area is CIPE. So there's an opportunity to get in touch with the CIPE as well, but also just here in Rwanda, where we have the AGRF happening next week. I know there's a launch that is planned that is related to insect as a source of food. So I don't want to put the information out there, but there's definitely a lot of information that is beginning to emerge. In the one on the 52 solution clusters that I talked about, they are also going to be in those solution clusters, which are available. We do have a compendium that is available again on the food systems website. One of those clusters is also about insects as foods. So I would encourage you to go there and look at, and behind those solutions are also institutions that work in those areas. So I would suggest that you get in touch with them. The information is available also on the web.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Catherine Peter addressing her question to Mr. Missy. She states that you have talked about agroforestry and agricultural activities. And she wants to know if it's possible to get the Milieu Volkensi tissue culture technology and start some nursery in the University of Nairobi at Faculty of Agriculture. So, Mr. Missy.
Thank you. Clearly, the research needs across all the continent are varied. Dr. Kalibata mentioned about insects. Besides ICIPE, there is also the International Platform of Insects and Feed and Food and Feed at the European level, which benefits a lot from Horizon Europe Fund. So there are a number of funding modalities. Some of them are competitive bids that I would like maybe to discuss bilaterally with the University of Nairobi, potentially. Because imagine every department from tissue culture to veterinary services. I think the best modality is clearly to enter into consortia on Horizon Europe, which is the biggest funding portfolio that the European Union has in terms of collaborative action across all the different value chains, but there is a big component on agriculture, food, and aquatic resources. The other clear potential is at country level. So I think the best would be that Catherine gets in touch with me. I put her in touch with our delegation in Nairobi to see to what extent our funding to Kenya actually can also benefit the university, and in this particular case, her department. But in my experience, most of the collaboration is best done at the research level on competitive bids by getting the like-minded on specific projects rather than getting government funding. We always know that government funding for universities has always been less and less. It has shrunk. And sometimes, unfortunately, university research is not always a top priority of many of the governments. So this is something that I would like maybe, Catherine, I'll put my email in the chat so that you can have and we can actually see with our delegation what is possible, feasible, and what could be alternative options to help you achieve your research applications.
Okay, there is a question here by Stephen Onakose. He states that the European Union has selected 8 coalitions to support from the numerous pathways. What is the African Union supporting, and how are these linked to universities, teaching, and research? I think Dr. Kalibata, the European Union have selected 8 coalitions to support from the numerous pathways. What is the African Union supporting, and how are these linked to universities, teaching, and research?
No, thank you for the question. The African Union is supporting the African Common Position, which recognizes that there are a number of things we need to move together as a continent. And that's why earlier on I talked about putting in place a framework at the African Union. The African Union has already committed to secure food system indicators into the ongoing CAADP indicators, so that as we monitor progress on CAADP, we can also monitor progress on food systems, which is a huge progress as far as I'm concerned. So the other bit then has to do really with how we help countries ensure that the approach to designing food system strategies and to continuously pay attention to the need to come through on a number of issues, not just food, to come through on nutrition and diet, to come through on environmental challenges, and to come through on equity and inclusivity, that these are at the center of food system transformations. So the African Union providing through its mechanisms, frameworks and oversight instruments, providing an opportunity for countries to take this on is something that we would be looking for, and something I know the Commission and AUDA-NEPAD are committed to. So that's number one. Number two is ensuring that actually countries do move forward and make progress on advancing food systems. That's something else that they are committed to. Again, having overseen a few countries stepping forward now in terms of how they design their food system strategies, now I think they will have a mechanism that allows a number of countries to follow through. The role and place of universities is extremely important in all this. We want to make sure that the analysis that is being done to inform countries as they try to understand the gaps and challenges they're dealing with at country level is anchored in again, proper analysis and what's happening in those countries. The solutions that are being provided or sought are anchored in evidence of how those solutions can work. So there's an opportunity for universities to engage and really ensure that, that the science is there. I think Leonard raised the question of agroecology and many other things that we could do. And a whole lot of ideas that are being put forward. I think one of the biggest places of universities and science in general is how do we go forward from here? Yeah, now we are here, we are in this place. What is the science? What is the direction? How do we go forward from here? Everybody's trying to come up with answers and solutions. There are going to be some no regret investments, but we also need to make some deliberate choices. And universities have a role in ensuring that we make some deliberate choices. So governments will always make no regret investments, but universities can ensure that these investments are also deliberate and are sustainable. So that's really probably one of the biggest areas where we can get the biggest support from universities and research institutions to ensure that direction is clear, to ensure that sustainability is anchored, and to ensure that some of the most difficult investing areas like inclusivity are showing up the right way, and the options and opportunities available are also showing up. Over to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Then we have spoilage, rotation of food to the market. And she's asking that, is there a strategy to ensure that the market fluctuation is minimal, or rather facilitate the transport of food to the market to avoid loss? If there are strategies to ensure transportation of food to market to avoid the loss that we're experiencing. That's Jacqueline's concern. I don't know if you can address that.
I think Jacqueline, I mentioned the issue of food loss and waste. We know that post-harvest losses are still very high, probably in the region of 25 to 35%. And this is going to be key. Cold storage, warehousing, road infrastructure, linking roads. There was another question on how to unleash the full potential of regional hubs. The case of Somalia or Horn of Africa and linking it to Eastern Africa. This is the whole process of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which we are clearly wanting to support. But I think the big challenge is how can African leaders also make the African Continental Free Trade Area a reality on the ground? It still has bigger costs to transport within parts of Africa, even in Eastern or Western Africa, than transporting from containers beyond the African continent. We know this, and before we handle these basics, it will be very difficult to unleash the full potential of the continental free trade area. So I think what is important is, and that's what we are trying to do in practical terms, how to handle sanitary and phytosanitary issues within the continent, how to harmonize, how to create internal markets like the EU has construed over 50, 60 years. This takes time. It will not happen in a few years, but it is part of a building block, because if we don't facilitate an integrated African continent, the intra-regional trade of African food, which is less than 20%, will not make the big transformations that the UN Food System Summit is aiming at through the pathway. So this is important. If you want to go into high growth, high job creation, the numbers need to be increased from an intra-regional aggregate rate of 15, 20% to clearly 40, 50, 60%. It will not happen tomorrow. It might not happen in 2030, but it can't wait until 2060 or 2063 or 2070. That might be too late. So a lot of bold action, lots of support that needs to be done by the donor community. We are doing it with our member states, but a lot of work also needs to be done within the African continent to dismantle a lot of barriers which are still happening and still take place within the African countries and the regions themselves.
Yeah, if I may, I want
Go
to
ahead.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. I do definitely agree with what Leonard is putting forward in terms of dealing with some of the challenges we have. And again, if you look at some of the work that has come out of the work of the scientific group, food loss and waste is really high on the agenda, and reducing food loss and waste, and looking at different ways of doing that. But I also wanted to encourage that we find in this conversation where we bring Africa, Europe conversations together, that we find a common ground that allows us to really deliver against the food system in a way that shows the collaboration and brings elements together in a collaborative way. So on one hand, the African Union is focusing on moving the national pathways forward and strengthening and encouraging countries to come through on national pathways. And the EU is working on coalitions, on a number of coalitions. But the question for me becomes, why don't we bring this together at country level and ensure that this is actually part of how countries are embracing work, that countries in their priorities, as they put their priorities forward, as they put the food systems transformation agenda forward, that this gets looked at. Because for me, Mitzi, one of the things that I'm struggling to understand, if you came to my country and you found that in the food system strategy my country has designed, none of the 8 coalitions is there, does it mean that all the other things we are prioritizing are not important from a food system perspective? So that's why I said local context is extremely important, and trying to understand how countries are overcoming individual challenges that they are living with. So I really want to encourage looking at this approach the African Union is taking of strengthening national pathways and ensuring that those national pathways are building on coalitions that are issue-based in those countries based on their local context. And I think we need to give them a chance to put forward their challenges the way they see them. So rather than try to do 8 coalitions because they know that this is where the funding is, I just wanted to highlight this as a potential area of thought.
Thank you very much. We're almost 20 minutes into the discussion. I think one question here is about collaboration research between Raw Forum and my university. How do we collaborate? This is from Nekes Kemtiene. And I think if your university is member university of Raw Forum, I think they can help you on that. And then the other questions are focused on students who would need funding to carry out their research. How can they be assisted? Dennis from Kenya says he's interested in organic preservatives to foster food safety. And his question to Mr. Messi is if there are any, or if there's any financial support for such projects. That's the last question.
Yeah, as I said earlier on, and I say it to Dennis, imagine all the thousands of students requiring funding. There is funding, but it has to be channeled through the university and through collaborative research at the international level. It is pretty competitive. So there are two options: competitive bidding, and we have Horizon Europe, which has open bids. I think this is something which is pretty competitive, not easy to secure, and clearly the bilateral assistance that the EU and the member states give to the national governments, and the national governments decide whether to support universities, education, and so on and so forth. I would say the most automatic, but it is competitive, is the bidding on Horizon Europe. But again, I will ask Dennis, yes, organic farming, agroecology, there's a lot of research applications available, and we have a program called Desira, which we also have unleashed in a number of countries, including African countries. I'll put you in touch with my people, and my people will also help you. But for example, on food safety, what we are trying to do is to support the continental platforms for food safety at the African Union level. Also, because SPS is something which is regional and continental. So Kenya is part of AAC, Eastern African Community. AAC is pretty much well integrated as a region, but clearly it's AAC and beyond from a continental point of view on organic farming and on SPS issues. So Dennis, let's be in touch bilaterally and see what is possible, feasible, both at country level, but also at continental level. But it's very difficult to finance the hundreds, thousands of individual projects that researchers do on a daily basis. This is what I mean by competitive bidding, and it has to come from an institutional point of view with European universities when the bids are open. Over.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of session 1. It's been very enriching, and we want to thank Dr. Kalibata and Mr. Messi for leading us into the discussions. The participants, from their questions, it shows us that everyone is quite engaged in these discussions that we're having. Thank you very much. We're now going to move to session 2. Session 2 focuses on the status of agri-food systems. And the session objective is to appreciate the milestones, opportunities, and challenges of agri-food systems in Africa as a basis for proposing key interventions in partnership with universities and other actors. And at this point, I am delighted to invite our speaker. He's the FAO Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa, His Excellency Professor Abebe Hele
I think again, you could be having a network issue.
I think the network for
Gabriel, please, did you hear me?
it was
I don't know if you.
No, the network cut you off. Maybe you can go ahead.
No problem. I spent the last 5 minutes introducing His Excellency Abebe. So I will do it again. First of all, and Mr. Messi for leading us through the session 2, which focuses on the status of agri-food systems in Africa. Our lead paper is going to be presented by His Excellency Professor Abebe Hele Gabriel, and he is the FAO Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa. He will
Amitu and perhaps His Excellency could talk.
Professor Abebe, you can go ahead because I think the network of the moderator is not okay. So you're most welcome.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dipala. Can you hear me? Just to confirm.
Yes, please. Very clear. Thank you.
Okay, let me first thank Professor Adipala for inviting me to share our perspective on this very important topic. I know I'm going to talk after excellent presentations made by distinguished personalities. Excuse me, I'm also facing a challenge of seeing my screen. Just bear with me. I was trying to share my screen.
It's okay, Professor. Let me stop the sharing such that you can reshare again.
Okay.
You can stop the share.
Let me share it. Okay. Let me share it again. Can you see it?
Yes, you can put it on presentation mode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it visible?
Yes, it's now clear.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Kalibata reminded us of one of the challenges, 2 challenges he mentioned behind the UN Food System Summit. The first one was to help all of us to get as close as possible to the SDGs by 2030, to be on track. I wish I could start by a positive note on the status of food security and nutrition in Africa. Unfortunately, I'm not going to do that because all the information we have, the data, the evidence show that Africa has been backsliding, in fact, with hunger and malnutrition worsening. The latest report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world shows that Africa has been bearing the heaviest burden. For example, there have been 278 million people who faced hunger in 2021, in Africa, meaning 1 every 5 of the population. 13 million or more people compared to 2020, a year before. So instead of going down, it keeps increasing. And if we compare the figure of 2021 with 2 years ago, which was the pre-COVID-19 pandemic time, which is 2019, the numbers increased actually by 46 million more people. And in fact, looking at the data, the trend from 2017, the prevalence of hunger has been on the rise in the Africa region. The drivers, we know there are overlapping shocks, protracted crises, and these have exacerbated vulnerability. The types of shocks remain more or less the same. We're talking about climate variability and extremes, conflicts and wars, the COVID-19 pandemic, different kinds of economic shocks. Now we have this year the additional dimension, which is the impact of Russian war in Ukraine. In Africa, the mechanisms and the capacities to mitigate the impacts of these multiple overlapping shocks remain either weak or absent or altogether. And therefore, the impacts have been much more adverse. Now, if we look at how the situation has been evolving, climate variability and extremes, you have this graph which lists countries, hotspot countries, and it measures the number of people in acute food insecurity in 2022. And looking at the Horn of Africa, where there has been a worst drought in 4 decades, in more than 40 years, which has exposed more than 20 million people. The latest data actually talks about 22 million people to hunger this year, with devastating impacts on livelihoods. The Sahel and West Africa, more than 40 million people face acute food insecurity this year. And this is a significant jump from 3 years ago. At that time, the numbers was about 11 million people. And according to FAO WFP Hunger Hotspot report, the graph which you are looking at, 6 of the top 10 countries in the world affected by hunger are in Africa. And in fact, they make up for 14 out of 20 countries globally. So you can see the extent of the problem. COVID-19 pandemic, how has it been affecting? This graph shows how it is a scenario. FAO built a scenario projecting what would be the likelihood of hunger increasing or decreasing with COVID vis-a-vis without COVID situation. And the top most is for the world, the curve, the graph, and the blue kind of is for Asia. The orange is for Africa, and the greener is for Latin America and the Caribbean. So let's focus on the African figure. You can see it has been increasing from 2015, and I've just mentioned 278 in 2021. According to the latest report. And now this is with COVID situation. If we project it to 2030, by 2030, remember, SDG's target is zero hunger. Now, by 2030, with COVID situation in Africa, we're going to have 310.7 million people. If there wouldn't have been COVID, the figure could have still been around 290.5 million. So it means more people slid into chronic hunger in 2020 than in the previous 5 years combined. The figures show that the recovery from socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 has been quite a challenge in Africa. And the projections which I've been talking about shows that about 21 million more undernourished people will in 2030 than a counterfactual scenario of no COVID pandemic, which is more than 310 hungry people by 2030 in Africa. So that's why we keep talking about backsliding instead of making progress. If we look at another driver, conflicts, wars, economic shocks. Now, to show the vulnerability of African countries to excessive dependence on food imports, just one factor. We have seen that at least 23 African countries rely on Russia and Ukraine because we are focusing on this particular war as something unique this year. For wheat imports, 15 of these countries depend for at least half of their imports, and some few for more than 3/4, even one country for 100% from 2 countries. So this graph shows you wheat imports from Russia and Ukraine. And as you can see, we are very, very vulnerable. This is 2021 figure on net imports. On fertilizer, a very important input for agriculture in Africa and elsewhere, in fact. Again, the vulnerability to excessive dependence on imports of inputs, using a fertilizer as an example. Russia, one country, is a major supplier of NPK fertilizer to at least 11 African countries. You can see Ghana depending for at least about 50% of their imports, Cameroon for more than 30%, Cote d'Ivoire for 30%, and so on. Now, the impact of this dependence, if we look at the contribution to food crisis, the Food and Fertilizer Exports Restriction Tracker, IFPRI, is doing this. It confirms that African countries are among the severely impacted. Now, of the 38 sub-Saharan African countries, 55% of them were severely exposed to this crisis. And food prices have skyrocketed. According to FAO price index, we have a historic high in March 2022. And as you can see from the graph, the Ukraine war really is a watershed. The topmost curve is for oilseeds. The orange is for cereals. These are price indices. And for food price index is the blue. The pattern is more or less the same. What is interesting to see is how the Ukraine war has really affected prices and therefore vulnerability, exposed countries, especially those dependent on imports from those countries to be very vulnerable. I want to emphasize that healthy diets have become unaffordable for close to 900 million people in Africa. Close to 1 billion people in Africa cannot afford healthy diets, and therefore they are susceptible to non-infectious diseases. Fertilizers have become less available, and they have become unaffordable to farmers. According to African Development Bank estimates, the price has increased by, in some cases, by up to 300%. So the price rose significantly, and this will have implication on production in the next season, and so on. Mr. Mizi touched on the balance of payment crisis. Now we have information from the UN Global Crisis Response Group, which shows that nearly about 63% of the 38 countries in sub-Saharan Africa included, they have been severely exposed to this crisis. And this is because of the high debt distress due to rising public debt. It jumped from 64% in 2019 to 71.4% of GDP in 2021. I'm talking about sub-Saharan African countries. And the public debt ratio rose to 20-year high in 2022. So you can imagine how tough it is for governments in the African region to mobilize funding. There has been dramatic increase in the cost of public borrowing. It has increased by 20% since the start of this year. And therefore, countries are allocating increasingly their revenues to servicing external debt, repaying of external debt, which is about 11.5% of the revenues in 2022. And this undermines their capacity to allocate resources to other priority sectors. Now, what is being done in response to the current crisis? Of course, countries are trying, they have been trying their best. But one of the things they do is they look to partners for assistance, for help. And development partners also have been proposing policy choices, and they have established different kinds of instruments. I'm very glad that Mr. Mizi has really shared with us information what the European Union has been making available. But just to give you some examples from the international financial institutions, the Africa Development Bank, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and IFAD, according to the information, the latest information that's available. For example, the African Development Bank announced in May a 1.5 billion African emergency food production facility to support targeting 24 countries in Africa. The World Bank also announced it in June that its board has approved a 2.3 billion program to help countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, and also additional 315 million to strengthen the resilience of food systems across West Africa, so more resources. The IMF has been engaging more than 20 African countries for assistance program. And IFAD also established the Crisis Response Initiative to support targeted and tailored initiatives to ensure access to inputs and so on. Now, FAO, it's not international financing institutions, it's a technical agency, has been making policy proposals, also to support countries with balance of trade problems. The proposal is to establish a global food import financing facility to make food available, but also accessible to help low and lower middle income countries. And in this, about 34 African countries have been included. But also FAO's recommendation includes proposals to support actions to achieve efficiency gains. I'm glad that trade issues have been mentioned. It's to keep trade open, to increase information transparency, to improve the use of fertilizers through use of soil maps. I'm very happy that Mr. Mizi emphasizes the use of soil maps, and this is what we have been advocating for. Reduction of food loss and waste, better targeting of social protection programs, and supporting resilience building, focusing on vulnerable countries. Now, what needs to be done? I want us to look at the fundamental strategic concerns in the African context. It's about enhancing productive capacity of strategic commodities. It's about encouraging more production and more consumption of locally produced goods, and therefore handling the issue of consumer behavior. It's about building resilience against future shocks, because the issue is excessive vulnerability. And it's about engaging in beneficial intra-regional trade within Africa, but also beyond. And the new element in this case is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But for AFCFTA to be effective, we have to address the issue of production right. Without getting the production right, only little trade can take place within Africa. It's good to have some recollection of what had been done previously. I want to mention two examples, very relevant. Abuja declarations. In 2006, two Abuja summits adopted important declarations. The first was the Abuja Declaration on Food Security. And I'm not going to dwell much on this, just to highlight. It aimed to take urgent measures to accelerate the development through promotion and protection of strategic commodities at the continental level, and so on. And then the Abuja Declaration on Fertilizer for Green Revolution, which aims to undertake to promote national and regional fertilizer production and intra-regional fertilizer trade to capture a bigger market and take advantage of economies of scale and so on. This was in 2006. The reason why I had picked these two is because, as I said, we are dependent on imports of food and then also vulnerable to it as well as fertilizer. So in terms of progress, we are in 2022, 16 years later, what do we talk about? We're talking about dependence on food imports and vulnerabilities to shocks. The food import bill has been mounting. It was 46 billion in 2020. 2 years later, in 2022, we have reached 56.4 billion. It jumped by 10 billion just in 2 years. And we're talking about public fiscal stress and so on. Sub-Saharan Africa is the largest rice importer region in the world. You see, the biggest market for rice in the world is in Africa. The war in Ukraine directly compromised food security and production through dependence on fertilizer import. Let's just look at it. With the price of natural gas, which is high and keeps rising, the cost of fertilizer is going to increase further next year. What will be the impact on access to farmers, to fertilizers, and the production of the commodity in agricultural products in Africa. The Dangote Nigeria fertilizer plant, which was launched earlier this year, a multi-billion fertilizer plant, but it targets at the moment the rest of the world markets. And I suspect the problem that it's not targeting intra-Africa markets is because of infrastructure deficits. I mean, we don't have the necessary both soft and hard infrastructure environment. So still, we're dealing with the challenge of translating those political statements into concrete actions. We have to deal with them. What could be done? An example of policy choices. I want to share with you information from one of our publications, and this is about the rate of assistance given as share of production value by instrument and by income group. And this is for agriculture. So we have 4 income groups: the high income countries, the first, the upper middle income countries, the second, the lower middle income countries, the third, and finally to the extreme right, the low income countries. The instruments, the different instruments we're talking about is the price incentive, the output subsidies, input subsidies, subsidies based on factors of production, and other kinds of subsidies. Okay, so this shows the kind of assistance given as share of production value. What can we observe? First, high and upper income countries provide several positive incentives in terms of price support, in terms of output subsidies, in terms of input subsidies, etc. And the richer the countries, the bigger these incentives. Second, lower middle income countries deploy limited positive incentives, mainly through input subsidies, but also disincentives, and this is mainly through price distortions. And the magnitude of the disincentive is much bigger than the incentive. Just look at the lower middle income countries. And finally, for the low income countries, and most of the African countries are in this group, they provide disincentives, and mainly through price distortions, and do have very few positive incentives to provide. And this would characterize most African countries. You know, unless we change this, there is very little to. Now, what are the implications for the UN Food System Summit transformative pathways that Dr. Agnes Kalibata has been talking about? I think it would be appropriate to talk of big elephants in the Africa room. It's not just one big elephant, several. I want to focus on 3. The first, food security, I think, is a national security agenda. This is the big issue at hand. Does Africa have to desperately depend on imports of strategic commodities, both food and inputs? I think we need to ask this difficult question. Haven't national securities already been compromised and undermined by such vulnerabilities for the agenda of food security and nutrition? In fact, agri-food systems to be categorized as among the national security agenda. This is the first big elephant in the house. I think we need to talk about it. Second, the investment finance is a real constraint. We have been talking about allocation of 10% of the budget to agriculture since 2003. Still, it is there. This is the fact. So this statement of the fact is not going away. And we know, as I have indicated, and also Mizi has mentioned about it, now we're talking about narrow fiscal spaces and mounting debt distresses. So governments, they do not have the necessary resources to increase more, to allocate more resources into this agenda. It limits the availability of financial resources. The third, which is related to the first 2, I want to put it in a kind of putting your money where your mouth is. We have to know where our mouth is, and we have to make sure that we should put our money where our mouth is. And this, in my opinion, is the plausible way out. And this is the need to address structural issues more strategically, and the readiness of countries to take advantage of opportunities, to operationalize the food system pathways. Remember what Dr. Agnes Kalibata has said. She said, we can't have priorities on the one hand and do something else on the other hand. We have to make sure that the resources that have been mobilized in terms of different kinds of instruments through international financial institutions, partners, and so on, must support, must align those food system pathways. And therefore, the mechanisms should be made available by the partners to support this. What more needs to be done? I think this should be my last slide. Some further suggestions for reflection. One, we need to fix the incentive structure. And to this, we can learn from successful cases and experiences of high and middle income countries who have solved their food systems. I have provided examples. Second, we may consider repurposing resources in terms of prioritizing food consumers, for example, and to incentivize sustainable production, supply, and consumption of nutritious food. And this would help make healthy diets less costly and more affordable for all. Third, we need to use the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as an important platform to enhance production capacity, without which trade will not happen, both to facilitate trade, but also to motivate competitive production. Fourth, we need to embrace science and technology and innovation to drive the agri-food system transformation agenda, including being intentional in improving our business model, of financing mechanisms, the partnership arrangements, advocacy, and so on. And we need to seek and enforce mutual commitment and accountability to action and results. Again, I'm glad Dr. Kalibata has made reference to it when she was responding to the question. I think without real commitment and accountability, I don't think a lot can be achieved. And finally, for RU Forum and its member universities, you can continue to leverage on platforms to advance science and innovation through effective policy dialogue and advocacy, to develop capacities and technical competencies, and to develop, I want to emphasize this as well, and use the right kind of narratives. I believe we are missing out on the right kind of narratives, and RU Forum and its member universities can help us to get us there. Without getting the right kind of narratives, I don't think we'll be able to develop the right kind of policies and implement them, away from this dependency attitude, and we cannot achieve. We can achieve, and there is no other way. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Ebebe. I think I saw several people put up on the chat that they would like this presentation to be shared. And I'll just want to state here that this webinar is being recorded, and the link is usually shared after the webinar. So rest assured that you are going to get all the presentations. Wow. Professor Bebe has actually got all of us scared, because even looking into 2030, we wonder if we're going to get out of this crisis. He's shared a lot of information with us, and his slides, the tables, the graphs have been very clear and in support of what he has presented to us. Recovery from the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 remains very challenging. High dependency on imported foods, lack of healthy diets, which leads to diseases, and revenue, the little we have is being used to pay debts. So we'll look at all of this on the slides. And I want to thank Professor Ebebe, and I will invite the 5 panelists that we have still in session 2. Dr. Yemi Akimbamijo indicated that he has another meeting. So permit me to invite him to speak first. So Dr. Yemi, please, can you go ahead?
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. If you allow me, I will quickly share a few slides. I hope I do have the right to share. Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Allow me to stand on existing protocol. I know time is of the essence, and I'll quickly run through a few slides to speak to the subject of today's webinar of moving forward the UN Food Systems Summit 2021 Action Plan and the need for collaborative undertaking. I will be giving some views on the African Manifesto on Forgotten Foods. As a brief background, food and nutrition security is key to development concern, and I think Dr. Abebe couldn't have said it any better. With the statistics, I think we all know it, the dire condition that is facing Africa. And this implication could be even worse, especially when you look at nutrition of the young children. And it also speaks to the need to increase agricultural productivity, provision of nutrient-balanced foods, nature-based agricultural production systems, as well as the coherent effort to reduce poverty will be part of the solutions in the context of the food systems going forward. But what FARA has done in the context, we actually contributed a few independent dialogue series, and we've been taking this forward in many spaces. But today I just want to speak to the subject of forgotten foods. And it's important for us to be able to look within. Dr. Abebe already showed the grim scenario, how much we're spending on foods that we can grow. So when we look inwards, we need to understand that we have foods that have immense cultural and consumer value, provide nutritious and healthy options, and they are resilient to climate change, and they are well adapted to our scenario. But what has happened is that these crops are barely used by farmers or barely improved. The farmers are all under-resourced, and the foods are underutilized in the global food system, and their knowledge is also disregarded. So the declined use due to negative social perceptions and lack of research interest. So we are now trying to reawaken the attention on forgotten foods with over 100 indigenous food commodities that are identified already, and the link is there, African orphan crops, because of their nutritional values and the adaptation to climate and natural resource domain, also requiring little input. These are the benefits of doing works like this. Africa is actually regarded to be the center of origin for almost half of these forgotten foods. And in the global process, we developed this manifesto in this framework that you have on the screen, FARA, representing the African Forum with the other regional fora that you see on the left, coordinated very nicely by GIFA and the other partners in that. And then we all packaged it in the context of the Food Systems Summit 2021. So how did we do this on the continent? We started off by working with the subregional organizations, the ASARECA, the CORAF, CADESA, and AFAS, who in turn engaged with the national bodies, the private sector, the International Research Center, to generate knowledge on what we call the working document, the working paper, and that was fed into a group of development space enthusiasts, researchers across the continent. Then we had a series of webinars to develop the manifesto and then push that into the community of practice. We came up with 5 pillars of the African Manifesto. I will not run through them, but first to say it's functional research and innovation, then it's innovation capacity, that's infrastructure, equipment, and expertise at local level to enable African research and education institutions. Then the engagement of youth, women, and rapid integration of forgotten foods in the national food system. And then we have the engagement of private sector to be able to invest. Dr. Abebe said that in his closing slide of the big elephants. We need to be able to have investment to be able to push this forward. And without the science, without investment, you cannot do the science. Then the financial resources, lastly, is what we need to support research and the coherent development efforts. As you know, this element speaks to forgotten foods. So they are not your usual potato, maize, rice, tubers, and so on. But in order to be able to bring these foods back to the table, back to the market, you need commensurate investment in research and in production. So what would be the action plan and the way forward? Number one is the awareness raising about this forgotten food, and we've done quite a bit of work with the GIFA communities in sensitizing the continent on that, creation of novel research program, the participatory breeding program for some of these elements of forgotten foods, and then the development of sustainable seed systems to be able to propagate these foods, promotion and collection of conservation of genetic resources. So these 12 elements you have on my screen are the elements of what has been jointly in a collective knowledge, in a collective sense, put together to be able to plan the way forward. And then what are we doing next from FARA is we have set up a Forgotten Foods desk at the FARA Secretariat. And this is one axis to ensure that we really can push the pathways towards the food systems approach. We set up the community of practice. We've developed a coherent research development program. We're now linking up with funders and partners. And we are very fortunate that we have actually been receiving positive responses. And then facilitation of the higher level policy engagement and action at the African Union level. And we also wish to run a biennial stewardship conference on forgotten foods. This is a pragmatic way to ensure that these foods come back to the market and to the tables. And then restructuring the African agricultural research and innovation framework within the context of our science agenda will be very crucial. Madam Chair, for me to conclude, forgotten foods constitute bedrock of the diversity we have in Africa in the traditional and indigenous food systems. We will neglect them at our own peril. It is imperative to collect and document local knowledge. So what are we doing in actually not talking about food system, but really doing the food system? We need to have these local knowledge documented, and we have what we call now knowledge management for agriculture going places in the context of driving the Food System Summit by FARA. And this information should now become useful for both product development and raising of awareness. And we must now shape the food system to deliver safe, nutritious, and affordable diets. I will now conclude by saying the time for action on forgotten foods in Africa is now. So, Madam Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'll revert back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Yemi, for your clear presentation. And I still want to inform our participants that you are going to get all of these presentations So in brief, Dr. Yemi has drawn our attention once more that there is need for finances to support research. We must invest in research and production. And I like the part about the forgotten food desk at FARA to push the pathways forward. Thank you so much, Dr. Yemi. I had mentioned that we were supposed to have documentary. I don't know if David.
Yeah, let's proceed.
We were supposed to.
Let's proceed in the interest of time.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move straight to listen to Honorable Malawi. Please go ahead, Honorable Minister. Hello.
Chair, perhaps you could
Please,
start
can you
with
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
May I suggest we proceed with the Honorable Minister from Liberia as we wait for the Minister from Malawi.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Should I proceed or are we waiting for the minister from Malawi?
Honorable, please, you can proceed. If he's not in the house, please go ahead. So we'll listen to Honorable Janine Cooper, Minister of Agriculture, Liberia. Go ahead, Honorable.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to Professor Adipala and of this forum. Thanks for always including and help of global of let me go quickly and say for Liberia, our commitments during the UN Food System Summit were threefold: on women, on youth, and on mechanizing agriculture. And in that regard, we had been working since the Food System Summit a year ago in trying to activate the kind of public-private partnerships and access to financing that would do that. In particular, we had the Liberia Agricultural Commercialization Fund that was activated and has now been channeling financing in cash and in kind to our agribusinesses, our cooperatives, our farming communities in different ways. We also looked at and that was to catalyze the work that we were doing in terms of women, youth, and agro machinery. We looked at women in particular, and we decided that our focus has usually been, when we're talking about women in agriculture, we get stuck in the farming part. And given that we want to move towards quality processing, building on our strengths in organic agriculture. We start to look more at women's roles throughout the value chain and focus our support on, besides the farming, the planting, but also going into post-harvest technologies and processing, food processing, packaging, marketing, and building up commercial food production, agri-food production for women in that regard. And then for youth, linked them very strongly to the mechanization portfolio, because that's where we see our youth. They don't seem to be interested in manual labor, in the hand tools, but they are very interested in the mechanization. And so we've been working with our technical and vocational education training systems, our universities and our technical schools to engage the youth in training in mechanized agriculture. But since the UN Food Systems Summit last year, Liberia, like every other country on this call and every other entity, has been faced with the triple C, the COVID, in the Ukraine. And so that has been compounding challenges and intensifying the urgency for us to seize opportunities to strengthen systems. We're faced with increased, and I thank Professor Abebe particularly for his presentation and on this, where you see the prices were at a peak in March, but they still remain much higher today than when we were preparing and going to the Food Systems Summit. And so it has increased vulnerabilities in Liberia. One of the things that we did when we realized the extent of the shock that we were facing was to undertake a rapid food security assessment, and the initial, and we haven't finalized that one yet, but the indicators are that
can we lower this and I said this?
Of Liberian households have inadequate food consumption at this point in time. And that is mainly because of that triple C, those triple C shocks. So we are facing this extra vulnerability that means that we have to do more. Also like to take this opportunity to thank the African Union and ECOWAS, as well as AGRA and other supporters. Things like the Special Emergency Agricultural Fund to provide us with seeds and fertilizer to help to stimulate our food production. In addition, I want to recognize the partnerships and dialogue that we've all over, particularly from the EU. So Commissioner Mitzi, thank you very much. USAID, IFAD, even the IMF, but also CGIAR, the research institutions, and FARA in helping us to realize in a thoughtful way and a meaningful way as well as our food systems.
Okay, it's mine that was talking.
That we can do together. And I want to mention in particular some of the partnerships that we're engaging on now with the work that we're doing with women in agriculture. We're looking at establishing with partners women's centers of excellence for women in agriculture, moving along the value chain, as I said, focusing on how we can do quality preservation, how we can focus on local foods and boost those in that way. I also mentioned the youth and the mechanization that we're doing through the technical and vocational training institutes, but also through our universities and research institutions. And we're going beyond just Liberian research institutions and universities. With FARA, we're looking at partnerships across the Atlantic with Brazil, but also with our other partners. We're looking at expanding food hub concepts that are being implemented in certain urban areas, particularly with the University of Washington, D.C., and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, where we're developing partnerships and have already established what we call our climate smart agriculture for sustainability and empowerment systems, where we have solar generated water pumping for potable drinking water for our communities, as well as for irrigation. And that system is it's an innovation where we start from what are the nutritional needs of the community, and we build the system around how we can provide those nutritional needs through irrigated agriculture that's coming from solar and renewable energy. We've been looking at a number of innovations. The time would not allow me to go into all of them, but I want to say that we cherish very much our relationships with our African institutions, RUFORUM, certainly FARA, AGRA, but also with our continental institutions and our international partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Cooper, for your very interesting presentation. Liberia is doing a lot to focus on women in agriculture, moving towards quality processes. Also support on post-harvest production, focusing also on the youth for vocational training systems to engage youth in mechanized agricultural training. And we commend you for promoting partnership with other universities, and also for boosting local foods, and of course, your partnerships across the Atlantic with Brazil. We have learned a lot of good practices. Thank you so much, Honorable Cooper. So we're going to move to the next panelist. I invite Dr. Stephen Mochiri, who is the president of East African Farmers Federation, to make his presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. And I think I'll be very, very quick. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation. I know we had been given a list of questions, and I think a number of them have been responded to, but I'll just make a quick comment and proceed with the 4 questions and responses. I think like has been said by FAO, East Africa is actually facing a high acute food insecurity situation. The number of people who are now food insecure has increased. And I think we know the challenges, they have been raised, the drought that has been prolonged, the COVID situation that affected access to markets, of course, the Ukraine crisis, and many others. And I think at the micro level, the challenges that have always been there have continued to be there. The diminishing productivity, the cost of high cost of production, fragmentation of value chains, unpredictable government policies, and reduction in investments, and of course, the reducing development support that has been there over time. And I think that's the reason why, even as countries embrace a lot of transformational strategies, agriculture still lags behind because these macro and micro issues are not yet dealt with. So any promising innovations are not getting to sustainability, and good policies are unfortunately not attracting the kind of investments that are actually needed. As farm organizations, we are actually happy to have been part of the high level advisory panel at the UNFSS process that has been mentioned by Dr. Kalibata. Of course, we know now the panel's role has ended and there's a coordination unit. We are also very clear that every 2 years will be an assessment to assess the progress of the commitment. We are also aware that there are over 100 national pathways that have been submitted, and more than 230 commitments have actually been submitted to the registry. So as farm organizations, what have we actually done? We actually put together a declaration that is in line with the 5 action areas that were actually part of the commitments. And we said that we are actually ready to nourish the world population. We actually asked for consideration for the latest IPCC report on climate change in 2021. We committed to promote sustainable livelihoods, be repositories for traditional and indigenous knowledge, defend biodiversity and the forms that it comes in, strengthen structures of farm organizations to build solidarity, commit and preserve rural landscapes, and protect and manage policies that, or push for policies that are going to ensure that you have sustainable urbanization. So after the UNFSS process, 30 presidents of farm organizations met. This president from Africa, Europe, and America. And furthering those commitments, we actually said, after we reflected through the UNFSS process, the 2 things. One, we are going to ensure that we are part and parcel of shaping the food systems of tomorrow. And we do it in 2 ways. One, looking at ensuring we have internal changes to improve the role of farm organizations in this process. And we said that we are going to work around unifying the diverse nature of farmer associations to create unity. We committed to professionalize agriculture as well as make it a viable enterprise. We committed to enhance internal communication and visibility within our associations and to integrate women and youth in leadership. In terms of the role of shaping food systems, we committed to use our mobilization skills and capacities to ensure that there's representation of farm organizations in key debates on food systems, create better cooperation and partnerships with the scientific community as well as the private sector and the CSOs. And we committed to play a monitoring role in implementation of the national pathways that were actually passed by the respective states. With respect to the gaps that exist and that need to be addressed for food systems to play a central role in building fairer and more sustainable world, our response to that is in 6 points. One, we need to rebalance the power in food value chains. I think for the longest time, Africa has suffered in terms of international trade. Now we have an opportunity through the ACFTA. How do you ensure that we are creating more rebalance in trade in local markets, national markets, and markets within Africa? Number 2, we need to deliberately enhance resilience. We need to look at how we can restore our ecosystems, but most importantly, how can we build safety nets for producers? I think the pandemic has actually shown how vulnerable producers continue to be. In terms of access to finance, we still continue calling for de-risking of food systems so that farmers can actually be able to access finance. But most importantly, how can we also ensure that subsidies around finance are properly structured and properly directed? As mentioned earlier, we did continue empowering food police organizations and ensuring that they actually embrace it. The 5th one is that we called for an independence voice at the UN by farmers. I think it's important that now we have strong farmer associations, that the voice of farmers need to be independent and voiced. And the last one, we're actually pushing for real partnerships between governments, consumer organizations, private sector, research, and innovation actors. In terms of potential partnerships with universities to improve the agri-food systems. So 4 proposals. Number 1, we are actually seeing opportunities in terms of access to innovations and technologies that are going to improve productivity, resilience, biodiversity, and natural landscapes. Like we actually committed towards nourishing the world. We need to ensure that these technologies, there's a bridge that is created to ensure that farmers can be able to access these technologies But of course, you know, there's back and forth linkages between ourselves and the research community. Number two, to better documentation of indigenous and traditional knowledge. I think it's very clear now, if you're going to work around resilience, how can we ensure that this kind of this knowledge contributes or is integrated into the modern bioscience innovations. The third one on capacity support, we continue calling for organization of value chains. We need to ensure that we are forming mutually reinforcing partnership ecosystem development, because the cost of production are actually very high. The cost of transaction are continue to be very high, unless we have some level of organization, not only within specific actors, but across all actors. We need to continue building the strength of our institutions. We need to continue doing studies and analysis that contribute towards policies that are supportive of advancement of food security and sustainable agriculture. We continue talking about lowering our food import bills, but we need to look at how do studies and analysis contribute to this. And the last one, we still need cutting edge research that attracts private sector investments and other green investments that is going to actually enhance production efficiency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muchiri. Yes, indeed, the voice of farmers must be heard. And we've gathered a lot from you. I like the part on a partnershiping with universities to have access to technologies and creating better partnership with the scientific communities and rebalance power in the food value chain. Thank you so much for your presentation. I will move to Dr. Usman Badien, who is the Executive Chairperson and Acting Managing Director. We'll listen to you.
Is not logged in.
It's not logged in, Madam Chair. Maybe we continue.
Okay. I don't know if the Honorable Minister of Agriculture from Malawi is logged in.
Yes, is logged in.
Okay. Honorable, good evening. Honorable Minister, good evening.
The is still muted.
Okay. I think it's on now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Sarah Tuone, and the Honorable Minister is currently engaged in another meeting. Unfortunately, he might not be able to join. Okay. Yeah, he will not be able to join. I'm Sarah Tuone from the Department of Planning. Basically, I'll just speak what he was expected to speak in line with the questions that were given and guided. So what is the current, for Malawi, the food system dialogues that we had helped us to really understand what would be the clear bottlenecks that are important for us to deal with if we have to transform our food system. And in that way, we were able to unlock some key information that talked of the importance of infrastructure development in food system distribution, because production, yes, is happening in the country, but currently what we're learning is that for that to be distributed across the country to where it is needed, it has been a major challenge. And this has had also the effect on prices and the quality of the food that is being distributed, meaning that we are experiencing losses within the country and associated with the transportation, the storage, and with less processing of what we are producing. In the end, we realize that our food systems are really challenged in terms of what we have. So we came up with some interventions, which we tried to say, if these pathways can be implemented, we would be able to transform our food systems. Ideally, the idea was to take a food systems approach where we have a holistic direction in how we are going to implement the food systems approach. And that has been one of the main agenda, where beyond the food systems, now that we have all these pathways ideas, how can different stakeholders, public, private, development partners, come together, first of all, to take stock of the things that they are already doing? Because food systems is not a new concept. The ideas that we put in food systems is something that we have been doing. But then, first of all, we need to understand, how do we consolidate these things? Who is doing what? Taking stock of that. Breaking the silos. I think that's the basic idea, that we want to break the silos in terms of what we are doing. And then after doing that stock taking, the next thing is to bring the synergies and gaps. So beyond that, how do we move together to come to get to a point where we know who is doing what and what are they doing? So further to that, what would be the key issues that we want to do now? As a country, the first thing is looking at the infrastructure development, responding to our challenges as we have indicated. We want to have an infrastructure that helps, first of all, in the production and then the distribution of the food. But also this infrastructure should help us to deliver a quality food. Our country is landlocked in a way, because we are not direct to are really expensive and challenging for us, any other imports apart from the food imports. But because we have the capacity and the comparative advantage in producing most of the crops, we take the approach of looking at more production of food available in the country, making sure that the food is around in the country, and then also it is distributed to where it is needed. Because of our diversity, our production levels across the different areas that are there. Yes, so for us to do that, the other thing that we are doing is we are looking for that collaboration and partnership. We have worked with the universities in Malawi. Then we have the University of Agriculture, we have the University of Science and Technology, and Business University, Health University. All that we have collaborated with them to come together and do research that brings out innovation in terms of how do we improve our production, how do we improve our food safety, how do we improve our level of business in terms of food production. So research and outreach has been the key thing that we have learned, that we have collaborated with the university, but also in terms of having a capital human development where the trained students that are coming out of the university kind of respond to the issues that are needed in the sector. Number one, being women-led programs and youth-led programs, because it is key that we do not leave anyone behind as we are doing the food system transformation in this case. We are also aiming at changing diets in promoting diversification. One of the issues was maybe we concentrate on producing one food crop at a time, but if we can have a diverse group of food, and then that is also being created with a demand that is available in the country, then we can have a market for the produce that are going to be produced at that scale. But that would require, of it's a slow moving target, we understand, because one when they grow up eating something, they cannot just change. So our target is school programs, as well as the youth, primary education, to make sure that you talk of the diversity of the food, introduce the nutritious food at a young age, for us to be able to change the trajectory of the foods that are available and consumed within the country. In that way, creating a demand that as country within, we are able to supply through the production that we are doing. But that requires innovation and outscaling of technologies. We can no longer continue to be comfortable with research beyond action. So we are looking for working solutions that have been tested, and then we outscale them, because we do not have the time and the luxury to continue to just shelf issues on the table in the name of we are going to do them. In terms of collaboration, again, we have the development partners in the country, we have the civil society, who all have a stake in how we are going to achieve this. But above all, our core is for the private sector to engage with public and development partners, because they also have the financial muscle that can help to boost any innovation or technologies that are there in the agriculture sector. But beyond that, I think the call is for collaboration and coordination among all stakeholders. Apologies from the minister once again, who is currently engaged, and I had to stand in on his behalf. Thank you very much, and over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do convey our best wishes to the minister, and thank you for standing in the gap to deliver his presentation, which is quite enriching. We're learning a lot from what Malawi is doing, working at increasing production of food and also distributing this food to where it's most needed. Looking for more collaboration and partnership to do research that brings out innovation, and research and outreach is key. And of course, building on human capital through training across the board, including women, and also aiming in promoting diversification in diets. And it's interesting to introduce the different foods at a young age. And I think that's very interesting. And of course, you strive to engage with the private sector and also to collaborate with all stakeholders. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Right. I think that was the last of our panelists. And at this point, we can move to the discussion. Already in the question and answer box, we have contribution from Mick Mwala. Dr. Yemi, thank you for bringing this issue to the front. I believe the issue of resilience in Africans' food systems, in recognizing what we have, which is of our own, what we are doing with it. I subscribe to the agenda and will follow up. The question that require no responses now are what happened to TEF development in Ethiopia, Bambara groundnuts, pearl millets, sorghums, and a whole host to the neglected but useful crops and fauna. We are hooked to the inorganic fertilizer dependent crops. Excellent reminder and strategy. He says the questions that require no responses now. So that was more or less some comments. And then there is a Medan Beckett. How can food be delivered without technology? And from Hamiso Dagi, what percentage of budget does African countries do African countries require to inject into agriculture and education to revamp the food security in the continent? Those are the questions or comments. And there is a comment too from Agagu Alod. How will this food system approach reach the poor rural producers? I mean the real portions of the investment reaching and helping the producers in the grassroots. This question is coming because I've seen many development agencies not producing any impacts on the production and livelihoods of farmers because resources do not reach the intended use. Farmers are experiencing dramatic decrease in production, decrease in food quality and safety. So the question here is, how will this food system approach reach the poor rural producers? So any of the panelists can address this, please.
Madam Moderator,
Yes, Honorable, go ahead. Honorable Cooper, go ahead.
Came up, a good one on how, yeah, thank you. Yes, the question on how can we food without technology. It's not exactly to provide to talk about one of the approaches that we have been using in Liberia and that we are promoting currently, and that is the homegrown school feeding program. If we can organize school feeding, which is something that we're trying to do aspirationally to all school children, to provide them a school meal, and you use the homegrown school feeding purchases local foods that are familiar to people, close to people, and deliver those. Sometimes even we're experimenting with the idea of school garden. That's one way to the consumer, just producing in giant, large commercial hubs and then having to transport it all over the country, but producing small scale, close to the consumer, encouraging school gardens and I mentioned our climate project, which starts with the nutritional needs, let's say, of a community of 5,000. At what is their caloric needs and what different foods those caloric needs, and you build the system around the nutritional calories that they need. We've got 2 prototypes, or the Ministry of Agriculture and to push these all over the country. Small, expensive, $30,000 to $50,000 for one system that has a borehole with a solar-powered water pump that delivers the irrigation to these gardens that will then provide the caloric needs. So if we can do this, food closer to home, foods that are local, that are familiar, that are in some cases forgotten with our, we can some of the challenges that are mentioned about imported food to other populations. I wanted to also commend the local foods. It requires advocacy, as Dr. Abebe also said, besides Dr. Akibabijo, but using the right kinds of narratives, because right now we have several decades of promoting imported processed foods as being superior to what we produce at home, with less inputs, that is more nutritious. I'm an advocate for local foods, seasonal foods, less processing, less chemical additives. So I just wanted to thank the two presenters who put those, and I hope I've addressed the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Hamiso Ibrahim has asked, what percentage of budget do African countries require to inject into agriculture and education as has to revamp food security in the continent? Honorable Minister, Mendan Bake thanks you for answering the question. So he's satisfied with your response. Thank you. So Professor Abebe, you want to answer that question? What percentage of the budget do African countries require to inject into agriculture and education as to revamp the food security in the continent?
Okay, thank you so much, Honorable Madam Chair, Professor. I would start by asking whether the approach to allocation of budget should be based on a percentage. The reason why I'm saying this is because we have an experience in the context of CADEP, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, which was adopted in 2003. There is a commitment by the African Union leaders to allocate at least 10% of their national budget to agriculture. That commitment has been there. 10 years after, when we went to Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, for the Malabo Declaration, there was they came back and recommitted. But the actual fact on the ground is that most of them, they are really struggling to allocate even 3%. Of course, if you ask me whether a government should allocate more resources to agriculture and food security, I would say yes, absolutely. Because if you say agriculture and food security is my priority, and that is what I've been emphasizing in my presentation. In fact, I even proposed for the agenda of agri-food system transformation to be considered as part of a national security agenda. So this is huge. So if you say it is my strategic priority, you should allocate as adequate or substantial amount of resources, not only domestic resources, but you have to, as a governments need to start to demonstrate ownership of the agenda by allocating an increased amount of resources, but also channel the resources coming in different ways, including investment from the private sector, from the partners into agriculture. Now, a very interesting question is, who is doing agriculture? Why do we want the budget? We want to increase productivity. We want to increase production. In the African case, we're talking about the millions, tens of millions of smallholder agriculture. It is them who are doing the increasing of production. How do we support them? How can we channel those resources from government, from donors, to support this process? It has multiple channels. Farmers cannot construct rural roads. Farmers can buy their seeds, they can buy their fertilizer, we can support them through extension, we can support them through improved seeds, and so on. But unless there is access to market, what is it that they can do? Here in Ghana, I am based in Ghana, farmers are complaining that they have a lot of mangoes but it is rotting in the field, in the farm, because they cannot send it. And in Accra, it's very expensive. We don't find it. So it's not moving. It's not being processed. Who is doing the processing? The private sector. It's not the government. Government is not doing production. It's not doing processing. It's not even doing marketing. So the role of government should not be reduced to allocation of budget only. Of course, they have to allocate budgets for infrastructure, both software, for education. But their role should be more in the area of policy support, facilitating those stakeholders and actors to do their work. So I don't want the discussion to be really, especially when it comes to the role of government, to be reduced only to the allocation of budget, even though it is very important, because as one of the elephants in the room, as you may have noted in my presentation, I have indicated investment finance, which is one thing. It's there, and Honorable Minister is here. She's the Minister of Agriculture. The Ministers of Finance, you have to really try hard to convince them why they should allocate more resources to agriculture. And part of the changing narrative is to show that agriculture also contributes to foreign currency earning, to poverty reduction, to the macroeconomic objectives that the ministers of finance can give air to. And we can support them in this, including the universities. Sorry, I took longer time. I am very passionate about this, Madam Chair, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. We have here, how will this food system approach reach the poor rural producers? I mean, the real portions of the investment reaching and helping the producers in the grassroots. This is a question from Agago Alud. He continues that this question is coming because he has seen many development agencies not producing any impact on the production and livelihood of farmers because resources do not reach the intended use. Honorable Cooper, yes, Honorable Minister.
Okay, yeah, maybe just to give an example, and from Malawi, what we have observed and what we intend to do is to take advantage of the decentralization system, because we have a decentralization system where small units within the government are making their own development plans. So with that approach, we are taking the food systems to them to make sure that as they are making their development plans, they are inclusive of this food systems approach. That way, because when we're capturing the ideas from when we're having dialogue with the different grassroots people across the country, the issue was most of the times innovations come to them, but they are not part of what they decide. So as with decentralization system, the idea is to solicit what should be done with the resources that are available at that district, for them to be able to prioritize what investments can be done at what point. I like the, I think Professor who was speaking before on the role of government budget. It should not just be about how much has been allocated, but how do we distribute resources that are in the sector? How are different players in the sector contributing to the development of the agriculture sector? Because at that point or at that level, that's when you realize that beyond the budget allocation of 10%, according to the Malabo Declaration, there are more resources that are supporting investments that are happening in the sector. So using the district and the smaller units as planning entities can help to make sure that recommendations that are coming from the food system are operationalized by the people that are really in their need of such interventions. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you too. Honorable Minister Cooper, did you have something to say?
Yes, thank you. On both points, I'd like to support the points made by Dr. Abebe and the official from Malawi. In the case of Liberia, our allocation of budget is less than 0.5% of the overall national budget. That is towards the ministry and the key public agricultural components all put together. The resources that we have for development projects that we're running are between times our government budgetary allocation. So Dr. Abebe is right. We can, if we're looking at things fairly, the resources we have available to effect the transformation that we need in our food systems is much more than what you see in the government allocation. And we're trying to find ways to reflect that in our narrative as a government. That biannual review, that private sector investment in agriculture in Liberia has increased dramatically and is increasing every day. It reflects our confidence in the sector and the knowledge that the sector is a key economic driver. But that private sector investment is also a source of government revenue as well, in the taxes and so forth. Now, the question of how to get it to the poorest, most vulnerable farmers, who are the bulk of our food producers, our subsistence holders, family farms, etc. We have in the ways that we approach our programming, we have a tiered approach. And so, for example, in our Liberia Agricultural Commercialization Fund that we're doing now, we have funds that we allocate as matching grants to agribusiness SMEs, and they're all SMEs. There's major agricultural business. We have towards cooperatives and sometimes of cash and to our smallholder farmers, we look at ways that we can aggregate through agropoles or concentrations around communities, clustering, and we focus much more on delivery in kind. And so in kind seeds, other inputs, the fertilizers that they need in ways that a cluster of farmer can receive a power tiller that several of them can use because it's inefficient and economically not viable for each one to have one. Can get access to services not only from government, but from each other. And so we have a multi-layered approach more that we can do, but certainly we're trying to address the needs of each layer of farm producer, agribusiness, processor, all along the value chain. Let me stop there. One last thing I wanted to say is that Professor Abebe also mentioned debt sustainability and the impact that the CCC crisis has had on many governments, such as mine, on their ability to take on more debts to finance their way and the increasing vulnerability. One of the things that we're doing in Liberia is opportunities are a heavily forested country. We don't benefits or financing for the ecosystem services that we provide globally in the warming through our forests, our mangroves, and etc. Financing for our what they call degraded lands, our agriculture industry, how we can do better for addressing some of the SDGs through the ecosystem services that we provide in our agricultural practices, which are largely organic, not using pesticides and chemicals that are causing high emissions, et cetera, et cetera. So climate smart agriculture, trying to attract some additional financing to address our sustainable development goals in that way. And we have some very interesting things that we're piloting, starting to pilot, but yes, for another.
Hey. Thank you very much. Okay. I don't see any more questions. I think we can now move to session 3, which is the wrap-up session. And our speaker for this section is Professor Umezorioke Linus Opara. He is the research chair in post-harvest technology at Stellenbosch University, South Africa. And his presentation is going to focus on the 2 questions. What are the key emerging issues and needed actions to strengthen agri-food systems, especially in Africa? And the second question, what are the next steps in developing actionable pathways and opportunities for partnerships? Professor Opara, please.
Is he muted?
He seems to be muted because he's talking.
He's not muted, but he needs to check his microphone. Prof. Linus Opara, you check your microphone because we seem not to get the output. Possibly you can disconnect the headsets and try to use the computer's microphone, or you change the input from the computer to the headset. It might be using a computer and yet you're on the headset. Check the input, which microphone is being used. Is it the headset or the computer headset? Alternatively, you can disconnect the headset and use the computer microphone. Not yet, we can't still hear you. Not yet, not yet. We can't still hear you. If possible, you can just disconnect the headset and use the computer directly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, may I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I spent a lot of time trying to organize all this today. I'm sorry, I'm so disappointed that's not working. Apologies, my Oga.
It's okay.
So thank you very much again, Professor Dipala and Rule Forum, and also to our honorable speakers and panelists. I should particularly mention that over the years, until even more recently, when the United Nations started to draw our attention to the need to improve and assure a sustainable food system, Rule Forum, as a continental platform, has been providing leadership in this area through different activities and programs that many of us have been involved. So I thank you very much. I thank you also, colleagues, for bringing a lot of new insights on this challenge of sustainable food systems applicable to the African continents. Listening to the invited speakers and the panelists, it's very clear that a lot has happened since UNFSS 2021. And so today's discussion is meant to enable us to identify some of the key emerging issues, emphasize the areas that we need to take action, and perhaps focus on the next steps in terms of actionable pathways. And a lot of our colleagues have really indicated what has been going on in their respective countries and also in their particular institutions. And so one of the things that came clear to me as we began today was when Professor Adepala brought it much home closer to us that the UN Food Systems Summit is very, very critical in our efforts to achieve the Africa we want Agenda 2063. So we are not just doing this exercise as part of what is just going on around the world. We are bringing it home. And bringing it home means reflecting on the Africa that we want. Professor Adepala also emphasized the need for us to focus on bold actions, and I emphasize the word bold actions, to make our planet a better place for now and for future generations. It also became very clear that universities and researchers have not been left out in this process and should continue to play an important role as we move forward. The Rule Forum Network contributed significantly to the African position paper and document, which clearly shows that all the actions we take must be very, very deliberate. It therefore means the Rule Forum and its partners, particularly the universities, have to concentrate and have to focus and keep asking the questions about the importance and the role of knowledge systems, about research, and how we can build inclusivity in our sustainable food systems of the future. I just remember this maybe last word that Professor Adepala mentioned during his welcome, that the ball is now in our court to move beyond dialogue to action. Dr. Kalibata provided a very clear global analysis of what has been done, actions that have been taken, and some of the immediate outcomes from those actions. I found it very, very inspiring that Professor Dr. Kalibata indicated to us why he joined this United Nations assignment. And I think it's important as we discuss the food systems in Africa. She personalized it and brought it home. That she wanted to make sure that we ensure that Africa is engaged, that Africa is not left out, that Africa is not left behind in the debate. And she actually brought it also much home to us, and it was very clear to me personally that this issue of the food systems transformation and sustainability is one of those global issues that affects Africa more directly. And we can hear this over and over again, especially the presentation by the ADG of the FAO. So the question then is, what are those challenges that have been faced leading up to the Food Summit? And some of them are still present today. First one is that we find solutions to the challenges of achieving Agenda 2063 and the United Nations Agenda 2030. Second one, the summit also was intended that it should be a people's summit, which means several dialogues were carried out that engage a wide diversity of people and countries and institutions. What was the outcome? What was the outcome that we now have to think about the impacts in the years ahead? The first one is that there were critical areas that were identified, 5 options. The second one that is very, very relevant to this meeting and the one that we're coming up in December is that this summit brought together a continental vision, the African position, Africa Common Position, highlighting pertinent issues to the African continent. It was also very, very enlightening to understand that 49 out of the 166 countries that participated came from Africa. So what are some of the actions that needed to be taken after that, after the summit, based on what has happened since that summit? A few things come to my mind here. First of all, Dr. Kalibata indicated and addressed the point that we need to rethink, redesign, and reconfigure our food systems that can deliver affordable, healthy diets. We need to rethink, redesign, and reconfigure our food systems that can deliver affordable and healthy diets. The second one is that we need to operationalize the new food system that we conceptualize. We need to domesticate them. There was nothing, and there is nothing called global food systems. Food systems are very local, and we need to operate at the local level while thinking about the global implications. Another point also that came out very strongly is the need for peer review, the need for us to hold each other accountable. The second point that also became very clear is the need for us to find finance to assist countries or regions that do not have the current capacity to do so. And this is very, very important. The other issue that came out was what are the next steps or actions that need to be taken. And Dr. Kalibata identified a few critical guiding principles. And I think these are things that will come up over and over again, even as we move into the AGM of Rule Forum. The first one is the need for us to strengthen national capacities. And how do we do this? This must be informed by science. So we need science-based evidence, not only for the sake of science in terms of technologies and innovation, but also to guide policy towards these new food systems. The second one is to recognize the role of dialogue. And how do we do this? How do we achieve this? We need to create the space at the local level. We're already doing that at the global and continental level, but we need to create the space where dialogue, where various stakeholders can be engaged, because the food systems is quite diverse. So it is not important, it is not necessary, and it is not good that one major stakeholder will determine what other stakeholders, their views should be. The other point that I think was also very, very pertinent to this discussion is the need for us to identify and address those difficult questions, to hold those difficult conversations, which will now enable us to begin to address the issue of trade-offs as we tackle the challenges in our food systems. What are those trade-offs? Which ones are applicable to particular countries? Which ones are continental in nature? And which ones are global in reach? These are some of the things we need to think about. And I think something that came out very, very strongly during today's meeting, based on the presentation of Dr. Kalibata, she emphasized the progress and the success that we have made so far through CADAP, and then drew a parallel on the need for us to develop a framework on food systems that will enable us to compare and benchmark actions and progress. And I think this is something that we need to think about and move forward because of the complexity of the demand on the food system and expectations. Deliver nutrition, deliver food security, but also help us to address the environmental challenges that is in front of us. And with respect to Rule Forum and the member countries, the statement was made that without universities, emphasis, without universities, it will be very difficult to achieve our progress in this area of addressing the food systems. And Dr. Kalibata finished by saying that we need you. And I believe that Dr. Kalibata was talking about Rule Forum and African universities and knowledge institutions. Our colleague from the European Union, Mr. Leonard Mizi, spent a lot of time to give us on the ground at-hand information on the focus of the European Union on operationalization of the food systems, the outcome of the Food Systems Summit. He indicated the additional funding resources that the European Union has put aside to support member countries and also developing countries, up to 3 billion euro in humanitarian fund. But there was one important issue that I think we need to really keep on the table. He brought the issue of the production typology. And the question is, what type of production systems do we support to deliver the food systems that we want? From a European perspective, the focus is on 8 coalitions, which were considered as to be game changers as the world moved forward. But he also went further to identify 4 critical areas where there are opportunities for partnership between Africa and the European Union. The first one is agroecology. And this is taking into consideration the need for us to maintain soil health, the need for us to apply fertilizer to the appropriate soils, and so on and so forth. So while we look for productivity gains, it's also important that we think about issues that impact on agriculture and issues that agriculture also impacts on, including, for example, carbon sequestration and the climate finance. And he alluded and mentioned a few European institutions that are currently partnering with Africa and African institutions and will continue to do those in the future, including CERAD, Wageningen, and other European institutions. The second focus area towards the sustainable food systems was the issue of plant proteins, increasing emphasis and demand and need for plant proteins. And that means diversifying our food system. It includes programs that such as food fortification, and also including local agricultural value chains, especially those ones that we know on the African continent that are dominated and led by women. The third focus area is the blue food, including whitefish, aquaculture, and algae, and the need for us to look at our aquatic resources so that we can ensure sustainable harvesting and also sustainable utilization. And the fourth and final one is, which is very, very central to work of Rule Forum and its member institutions, is agricultural research. In particular, the problem of food losses and food waste was identified. And in this area, our knowledge institutions need to start thinking about what solutions that currently exist that are scalable. And this is an important area that we can begin to think as we move forward. What are some of the other lessons that we've learned from the Food Security Summit? One is that we cannot take anything for granted, and that the food system will continue to be under tremendous stress in the years ahead. Example of those are the drought that we see in the news all over the world, from Africa to Asia to Europe to the Oceania. And the water stress has a couple of implications. First of all is the issue of cost. And the second one is the issue of availability of the water. And these two are interlinked and can be connected to challenges about food security and also energy security. But in all this discussion, the role of universities in partnership with the private sector will be very, very crucial if we are going to move forward in advancing the application of those existing innovations. It is very, very clear that things will have to impact at the local level if we are going to make success. So acting locally becomes very, very important. So what are the roles of Roof Forum and the universities in Africa? African universities must continue to increase their game in bridging the gap between policy and science so that we can have action on the ground. Colleagues, there are a few more issues here. I'm not going to give a summary of all the presentations. We're going to summarize this and share through Roof Forum. But it was very, very disheartening listening to the ADG of FAO, perhaps highlighting what we already know. The fact that Africa is backsliding in its food and nutrition security status. We have worsening hunger and malnutrition. So we are discussing issue that is central to the existentiality of life on the African continent and the world at large. Second one, there are now drivers that are overlapping, providing shocks, providing contracted crises that are likely going to worsen the situation. The first one is the climate variability and its extremes, pandemics and the potential for new ones to happen, conflicts, wars, and economic shocks. These are not going to go away immediately. And our food system has to operate under these conditions until we find sustainable solutions. The one message that we also take from this is that on the African continent, healthy diet has become unaffordable to the majority of Africans. So what are the interventions? What are the actions that have been taken, especially since the summit? Professor Gabriel highlighted the work of the African Development Bank in developing emergency fund for food production facilities, highlighted the work of the World Bank, the IMF, IFAD, and FAO as a policy organization. But what needs to be done? He indicated that we needed to go back to the fundamental strategic concerns facing Africa. But there are opportunities because Africa has taken steps from a policy point of view in the past to anticipate and possibly respond to some of these emerging challenges. He recollected the two summits or declarations that were held in Abuja, Nigeria. The first one is Abuja Declaration on Food Security, 2006, and also the Abuja Declaration on Fertilizer for Green Revolution. The challenge now is, in reflection, how much progress has been made. He clearly showed that based on the emerging statistics on a mounting food import bills in Africa, that we have actually gone backward rather than forward. For example, Africa is the largest importer of rice than any region in the world. And in my view, there's nothing wrong with importation. Africa needs to trade with the rest of the world. The problem now is, what does Africa sell to the rest of the world and among its member states? So these are issues that have implications on our food security and our food system into the future. He also identified pathways that have implications in addressing these challenges. The first one is that food security must be considered as on a national security agenda. And I think this is a new insight for me, that we need to begin to think about bringing this discussion, not just about nutrition, but also as a national security issue at hand in countries like this. The second one is investment finance is currently a major constraint, that we need to put our money where our mouth is. And colleagues, I just want to wrap by just identifying 3 key points that I believe that if we address them and talk about them, we must begin to now think about the way forward. First is the productivity challenge in our food system, the productivity challenge. And that also includes total production on African continent. The second one is being able to save what we produce. And that means reducing losses. But the third one that I think is very, very critical is the ability for Africa to trade with itself and also with the rest of the world in the area of food systems. All the technologies that have been talked about, all the marketing systems that have been talked about will not lead us to anywhere if Africa is not able to produce what it can produce. But more than that, Dr. Yemi Akimbamijo has also brought our attention on the African Manifesto on Forgotten Foods. The significant opportunity that's on our doorsteps for science to drive a revolution in our food systems that will unleash African resources with high value among Africans and to the rest of the world. I think this is an important area that needs to come to the table. I also talk about food systems of today and in the future. This cannot happen if we don't create novel research programs and networking. This will not happen if we don't collect and conserve these African resources. Our leaders, your excellencies from the different countries, have also shared with us the country responses to the outcomes of the summit. We have heard about women, emphasis on women, the emphasis on youth, and the emphasis on mechanization of agriculture. I think these are real issues that apply to other countries on the African continent. So in summary, we have a lot of statistics in front of us. Many of them are quite grim, but some progress has been made. But we need bold actions. We need strong leadership at all levels, in our institutions, in our countries, in our local communities, so that we can begin to tackle these local problems of food systems while thinking about the continent and the world at large. And I'm looking forward to the conversation that will continue here and in Malawi forward. And I thank the World Forum for this opportunity to listen and also to distill out some of the issues that have come out of this. I thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, Professor Depala.
Thank you very much, Prof. Opara, for wrapping up. You've done this so well and refreshed our memories of how well our distinguished panelists, our distinguished speakers have delivered their presentations. I will call on Professor Adipala, the Executive Secretary of World Forum, to give his closing remarks.
Madam Chair, the Forum Board Chair, and the Vice Chancellor of University of Bamenda, distinguished colleagues, distinguished participants, listening to the summary from Professor Opara, he has really captured the gist of the discussions. A lot of actions have already been initiated at our country level, listening to what is happening in Liberia, listening to what is happening in Malawi. It gives us hope. But I think the road ahead is going to be very, very tough, and it will need extra effort by all of us. I think Professor Abebe, you really highlighted these things, but also the speakers highlighted the opportunities. I think the issue of really getting everybody, really recognizing that you cannot do this alone. You cannot do it alone. We need collective action. And I think to me that is the call to all of us. But like one former US president said, it can be done. I think we can do it. So colleagues, I thank all of you, the speakers, for your insights and inputs. The chair, we thank you for the moderation. Linans, Oga, thank you very, very much. Participants, thank you for being there and for the rich questions that you asked. We will work with Linus and put a summary, a synthesis of the discussion and share it with you. And we'll make sure we also share it with various policymakers and other leaders for actions. So thank you very much. And have a nice evening, a nice morning, but thank you. Let's do it for Africa, please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
And thank you, Prof. Permit me just to announce that our next pre-AGM dialogue is on the 5th October 2022 on the theme Strengthening Human Capital Development in Africa. Where are we and what are the needed actions? So hope to see you on the 5th of October. Thank you.